To be born a wealthy widow in Gilded Age America was to inherit a contract written in black crape and signed in the grave. Your husband's will did not merely distribute his fortune. It dictated the length of your seclusion, the color of your dress, the silence of your parlor, and above all, the unmarried state of your bed. Break the contract, and you forfeited millions. Keep it, and you forfeited your life. 4 women refused to choose. One was 19 and pregnant when the Atlantic took her husband. One buried 2 husbands and funded a revolution. One emptied her palace in a single night. And one died in a hotel suite with $3,500 to her name. Chapter 1. The Bride. The clergy refused to marry. In September of 1911, a Providence pastor accepted $2,000 to perform a wedding every Episcopal priest in New York had already declined. The bride was 18, the groom was 47, and in the quiet eyes of American Protestantism, the groom was a sinner who had already buried one marriage in a courtroom, which was very nearly the same as burying it in hell. Her name was Madeleine Talmadge Force. She had been born into the comfortable tier of Brooklyn society, the daughter of a shipping merchant named William Force. Her family was not Astor rich. No family was Astor rich. But the Forces kept a townhouse on East 37th Street. They summered in Bar Harbor. They sent their daughters to Miss Spence's school on West 48th, where the granddaughters of railroad kings learned French grammar, watercolor painting, and the proper way to close a fan. Madeleine learned all of it. She was, by the accounts of those who knew her, quiet and polite, and not especially beautiful. What she had, instead of beauty, was a stillness, a settled quality, the kind of poise that older men often mistook for wisdom. Colonel John Jacob Astor IV noticed her at Bar Harbor in the summer of 1910. He was the richest man on the eastern seaboard. The Astor fortune, laid down by a German immigrant fur trader in the 1790s and compounded through a century of Manhattan real estate, had by 1910 ballooned to roughly $87 million, the equivalent, in modern currency, of more than $2.5 billion. The colonel owned the St. Regis. He owned the Knickerbocker. He owned the land beneath other people's wealth. He had invented a bicycle brake and a turbine engine. He had written a science fiction novel in 1894. He had fought at the Battle of Santiago in Cuba. He had also, 3 years before he met Madeleine, divorced his first wife, Ava Lowell Willing, and this was the fact that mattered. Divorce in Edith Wharton's New York was not a legal condition. It was a social disease. The Episcopal Church refused to remarry divorced men while their former wives still lived. The Astor name opened no doors here. Ava was still very much alive, cutting figures in London and Newport with a cool indifference that made her ex-husband's courtship of a teenager look even more grotesque than it already was. The press called the engagement a scandal. One paper called it wicked lust. Another paper called it the purchase of a daughter by a man old enough to be her father twice over. A cartoon in a humor weekly showed the colonel carrying a doll under his arm and a wallet under the other. The colonel needed a minister. He was refused in order by the rectors of Trinity Church, Grace Church, and St. Thomas on Fifth Avenue. He found his man in Providence, Rhode Island. The Reverend Joseph Lambert of a small Congregationalist parish was not bound by Episcopal prohibitions, and he was not rich. $2,000 in 1911 was more than the average American worker earned in 3 years. He accepted. On the 7th of September, in the ballroom of the Astor cottage called Beechwood in Newport, Madeleine Force became Madeleine Astor. She wore a simple white gown. The reception had fewer than 20 guests, because the Newport hostesses, whose invitations the colonel had once commanded, no longer wished to be seen inside his house. The prenuptial settlement put $5 million in her name, but the number that mattered most was buried elsewhere, in the fine small print of the colonel's existing will. He had drafted it before the marriage, and he had attached to the widow's portion a clause that he believed no teenager would ever test. Should his wife remarry after his death, the $5 million trust he had created for her was to dissolve, returning the capital to his heirs by blood. She could have his money. She could have his name. She could not have both his money and another man. The young bride signed her papers and did not read the clause with the attention it deserved, because in September of 1911, she had no reason to believe she would ever need to. That winter, the colonel announced the obvious solution to the social freeze. They would travel: Egypt, Paris, the Riviera, a long honeymoon abroad until New York grew tired of disapproving. By early April of 1912, Madeleine was 5 months pregnant. She wanted to give birth on American soil. The colonel booked 2 first-class staterooms on the maiden voyage of the newest and largest ocean liner in the world, a ship that the White Star Line had spent the equivalent of 200 million modern dollars building and advertising as practically unsinkable. He paid $3,400 for the passage, the equivalent today of more than $100,000. He brought along his Airedale Terrier, Kitty, and his valet, and his wife's personal maid. On the night of the 10th of April, the little party boarded at Cherbourg. They took parlor suite C62. They had, according to every record on file, exactly 4 nights left together. Chapter 2. The night the Atlantic became her jailer. 5 months pregnant and 19 years old, she stepped into Lifeboat 4 while her husband calmly cut open a life vest to show her what was inside. The collision came at 11:40 on the night of the 14th of April, 1912. Most of the first-class passengers slept through it. In Suite C62, the colonel had been reading, Madeleine already in bed. The shutter was so gentle that the colonel initially assumed a propeller had thrown a blade. He stepped into the corridor in his robe. A steward told him a minor incident had occurred with the ice. He went back to bed. Within 20 minutes, he had dressed himself in tweeds and was standing on the boat deck, watching stewards uncover lifeboats that nobody, including the ship's officers, had expected to use. He came back for her. He helped her into her fur coat. He fixed around her neck the diamond and emerald pendant he had given her in Cairo. He fastened her life vest. Then, according to her later testimony, he took a penknife from his pocket and calmly cut open another life vest so that he could show her, almost gently, the cork inside. It was, one survivor later remembered, the last piece of husbandly instruction he would ever give her. If she ended up in the water, he wanted her to trust the vest. Lifeboat 4 was the last of the portside boats to be loaded. She got into it at around 1:20 in the morning. Lightoller, the second officer, was running the portside evacuation. He had taken the phrase "women and children" with a ferocity the starboard side had not matched. When the colonel, who was 50 years old and in good health, asked if he might accompany his pregnant wife into the boat, Lightoller said no. He added, because the colonel was the richest man on the ship, and this was the Edwardian age, that he was very sorry. The colonel tipped his hat. He stepped back. He waved to Madeleine. He lit a cigarette. He also, in the 10 minutes between her departure and the final submersion of the ship, performed a small act of unrecorded tenderness. He unfastened his wife's fur stole, which she had left on her seat, and he handed it down over the rail to a third-class woman with a baby who had somehow reached the boat deck without a coat. The stole was later valued at $2,000. The baby wore it, wrapped through the cold night in the North Atlantic. The woman who received it gave her testimony to a British inquiry and said she did not know the name of the man who had handed it to her. The Airedale Kitty was last seen on the boat deck, pacing near the stern. She did not survive. Madeline watched the ship go down from 1,000 feet of black water. She saw the forward half slip. She saw the stern rise against the stars. She heard the sound that every survivor of that night described in the same inadequate words, which was the sound of 1,500 human beings screaming in water that was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The screams lasted about 20 minutes. Then they stopped. Then the boat rode in silence until dawn. The rescue ship Carpathia picked up Lifeboat 4 at around 8 in the morning on the 15th. Madeline climbed its rope ladder with her coat and her pendant and her unborn child and nothing else. She spent 4 days in a stranger's cabin on the way to New York. She did not know yet that her husband's body had been recovered. The cable ship Mackay Bennett found the colonel floating in his life vest on the 22nd of April. His face was crushed, likely by a falling funnel or a piece of the superstructure. His pockets held $2,500 in cash, a gold watch, a diamond ring, diamond cufflinks, and a silver flask. He was identified by the initials on the flask. When the Carpathia docked at Pier 54 on the night of the 18th of April, Madeline was helped down the gangway by her father. A reporter later wrote that she whispered 4 words into her father's chest. The 4 words were reported differently in different papers, but the version that most often appeared in print was this: "Take me home, please." Whether she actually said it, or whether the press invented a tidier sentence for a grieving widow, nobody today can verify. What is certain is that she went home to a Fifth Avenue mansion that she now owned, to a city that now belonged to her by right of inheritance, and to a will she had not yet read carefully enough. Inside that will, signed months before her wedding, waited the clause that would become the defining cage of her adult life. Chapter 3: The Will That Chained Her to a Ghost. The colonel had left her richer than most American queens on one condition: she must never love another man. The Astor estate, when probate concluded in the summer of 1912, was valued at between $85 and $90 million. In modern currency, this is comfortably over $2.5 billion. The figure meant that the 19-year-old widow of John Jacob Astor was suddenly one of the wealthiest women in the United States, richer than the Queen of Belgium, and richer than the entire treasury of several small republics. She inherited his Fifth Avenue mansion at 65th Street, a red brick palace with a ballroom that seated 1,200. She inherited the Newport Cottage Beechwood with its 80 acres and its view of the sea. She inherited furniture, silver, paintings, horses, and a vault at the Knickerbocker Trust that contained, among other curiosities, a gold snuff box given to the first John Jacob Astor by Napoleon. What she did not inherit was freedom. The colonel, who had not expected to die at 50, had nonetheless written his will with the moral anxieties of his class. The bulk of the estate, some $69 million, passed to his adult son Vincent Astor from his first marriage. Another $3 million went into a trust for the unborn child, a boy who would be born on the 14th of August, 1912, and christened John Jacob Astor VI, though everyone would call him Jakey. To Madeleine, the Colonel left the use of the Fifth Avenue house, the use of Beechwood, and the income on a $5 million trust fund. $5 million in 1912 threw off roughly $200,000 a year in dividends. It was enough to keep a small court. The catch was printed one sentence deep. The $5 million trust and the use of the houses would be hers only so long as she remained the widow of John Jacob Astor. If she remarried, the trust dissolved. The houses reverted. The income vanished. She would keep only her $5 million prenuptial settlement and whatever she had personally acquired. The Colonel had, in effect, written her a contract that paid her to grieve forever. And he was not alone in writing such contracts. The remarriage clause was a standard instrument of the Gilded Age widower. Cornelius Vanderbilt II used a version of it. Hamilton Fish used a version of it. A survey of surrogates' court records in Manhattan between 1890 and 1920 suggests that nearly 1 in 3 major American estates written by men included some form of conditional widowhood. The legal philosophy was simple. A woman could not be trusted with money. A mother could be trusted only as long as her children's father still reached her from beyond the grave. The 6-foot crape veil that Godey's Lady's Book itself admitted was blinding and stifling was not just a costume. It was a uniform of economic discipline. For the first 2 years, Madeleine wore it. She gave birth to Jakey in the Fifth Avenue house. She took him to Bar Harbor the following summer. She spent the winters in the city, dressed in black, receiving a narrow circle of women friends, most of them older, most of them also widows. She attended no balls. She accepted no dinners. She did not travel except with a chaperone. A society reporter writing in 1913 called her the loneliest girl in the United States and meant it, for once, without sarcasm. Jakey grew into a clever, sickly little boy. She read to him every night. She walked him through the upstairs rooms of Beechwood in which his father had once lived, and she pointed at the photographs. In the 3rd year of her mourning, a man began to appear at her side. His name was William Carl Dick. She had known him since she was a girl. He was 32 years old. He was the heir to a moderate but perfectly respectable Brooklyn banking fortune. He was single. He was kind. He was, by every contemporary account, deeply, patiently, unembarrassedly in love with her, and had been since well before the Titanic. He did not ask her to marry him for a long time. When he did, she said yes, and then she sat down with her lawyers. The lawyers ran the math. The trust would dissolve. The Fifth Avenue mansion would pass to Vincent. Beechwood would pass to Vincent. She would keep her $5 million prenuptial settlement and whatever jewelry and personal property she had acquired. She would lose roughly $7 million in capital value and roughly $200,000 a year in income for the rest of her life. She would, in modern terms, walk away from more than $200 million for the privilege of a second marriage. On the 22nd of June, 1916, she walked away from all of it. The wedding was held in Bar Harbor, at her parents' summer cottage, with 20 guests in the garden. She wore pale gray instead of black. She carried white roses. The ceremony took 11 minutes. There were no reporters because she had told no reporters. The news broke the next morning in the New York Times under the headline, "Astor Widow Weds," and the first sentence of the article noted, with a kind of awe, the exact dollar amount she had surrendered to do it. She did not look back. But the contract she had broken would not be the last one written by a dying man, and on a hillside in Newport, a far more dangerous widow was already learning to rewrite the entire book. Chapter 4. The Mobile Girl Who Declared War on Newport. She was born in Alabama, raised in France, and by 30 years old she had humiliated the most powerful woman in New York in her own ballroom. Her name was Alva Erskine Smith. She had been born in Mobile in January of 1853 to a cotton merchant father whose fortune was in two things the Civil War was about to erase, which were plantation receivables and Confederate currency. When Alabama fell, the Smiths fell with it. Her father moved the family to Paris in the years after the war, partly because Paris was cheaper than New York, partly because his nerve had broken. Alva, aged 12, watched her mother sell jewelry to pay rent on a modest house in the 16th arrondissement. She attended a French school. She learned history from teachers who remembered the Commune. She returned to New York at 18, speaking 3 languages and carrying a permanent suspicion of genteel poverty. She had, she later said, decided while she was still a girl that she would never again be the daughter of a bankrupt man. The solution was a husband. His name was William Kissam Vanderbilt. He was the second son of the second generation of the Commodore's fortune, a tall, handsome, not especially bright grandson of the old railroad pirate who had left $100 million to his eldest son when he died in 1877. William was young, rich, easily led, and possessed of the one thing Alva had decided she wanted, which was a name that had yet to be socially accepted. The Vanderbilts, for all their money, were new. Mrs. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, the undisputed queen of New York society, the woman whose 400 dictated who was and was not a person, refused to acknowledge any Vanderbilt at all. Alva married William in April of 1875. She was 22. She spent the next 8 years studying her enemy. She studied her like a general studies a fortified city. Mrs. Astor lived at 355th Avenue in a red brick mansion that her architect had designed to look as if it had always been there. She held a ball every January. She invited the same 400 people every year. She did not invite Vanderbilts. She did not invite divorced women. She did not invite Jews. She did not invite actresses. She ruled a city by the simple tactic of refusing to acknowledge its existence beyond the 4 walls of her ballroom. Alva watched this for 8 years. Then she built a bigger ballroom. The house at 665th Avenue went up between 1879 and 1882. It was designed by Richard Morris Hunt in the style of a late 15th century French chateau, with limestone walls and turrets and a great staircase of imported canned stone. The total construction bill came to $3 million, the equivalent today of nearly $100 million. It was, at the time, the largest private house ever built in Manhattan. Alva furnished it with tapestries pulled out of bankrupt French aristocrats' attics. She installed a ballroom that could seat 800, and on the 26th of March, 1883, she announced that she would open it with a costume ball. She invited 1,200 guests. She did not invite Caroline Astor. The slight was calculated with the patience of a surveyor. Alva let it be known, through intermediaries, that the reason she had not invited Mrs. Astor was that Mrs. Astor had never called on her. It was a technicality, the way a siege is a technicality. In society, a call was the basic currency of acknowledgement. If you had not called on a woman, you did not know her, and if you did not know her, you could not be invited to her ball. Mrs. Astor's daughter, Carrie, meanwhile, had spent the winter rehearsing with other young women for a quadrille that was to be performed at the Vanderbilt ball. Carrie wanted to dance. She told her mother so. Caroline Astor, after 8 years of refusing to acknowledge that the Vanderbilts existed, ordered her carriage. She drove to 665th Avenue. She instructed her footman to deliver her calling card at the door. The footman returned to the carriage. Mrs. Astor returned home. Within the hour, a Vanderbilt footman delivered an invitation to the ball at 355th Avenue. The war was over in a single afternoon. Caroline Astor had surrendered a kingdom because her daughter wanted to dance. The ball itself was beyond description, though contemporary papers tried. Alva wore a costume of a Venetian princess with real emeralds sewn into the bodice. Her husband came as the Duc de Guise. The quadrille of the hobby horses, performed by 6 couples in plumed hats riding costumes of stuffed horses belted to their waists, cost $15,000 to stage alone. The orchestra numbered 90 musicians. The supper was laid for 3 sittings. The ice sculptures of swans weighed 200 pounds each and took 4 men to carry. The florist's bill came to $11,000 for a single night, more than 100 times the annual wage of the seamstresses who had stitched the costumes. Alva had learned her first lesson. Money was not wealth. Position was wealth. Position was taken by force. She had a second lesson still to learn, and she would teach it in the most brutal classroom available to a Gilded Age woman, which was the body of her own daughter. Alva had 3 children by William Vanderbilt. The eldest was a boy named William Kissam Jr. The middle was a boy named Harold. The youngest was a girl born in New York on the 2nd of March, 1877. She had been christened Consuelo, after her godmother, Consuelo Iznaga, a Cuban-American beauty who had made a fashionable English marriage. The name was a program. Alva had chosen it because she had decided, before her daughter was a week old, that Consuelo would marry a European title. By the autumn of 1895, Consuelo was 17. She had grown into a tall, slender, shy girl with a long, pale neck and enormous dark eyes. She was in love with a young New Yorker named Winthrop Rutherford. Winthrop was handsome, American, and untitled. Alva had other plans. In a rented London house that summer, she had negotiated the sale of her daughter to an Englishman who did not love the girl and whom the girl did not love. The Das exchange would remake 3 fortunes and ruin one young woman's life. And before she was done, Alva would lock her daughter in a bedroom until the girl agreed to the sale. Chapter 5. The daughter she locked in a room. In the autumn of 1895, a 17-year-old girl cried behind her wedding veil as her mother delivered her to a duke she did not know. The duke's name was Charles Richard John Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough. He was 23 years old, 5'6", narrow-shouldered, proud, cold, and in possession of the one asset every dollar Princess Mother in America had trained her daughter to covet, which was an English dukedom of the first rank. The Marlboroughs had been dukes since 1676. They lived at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, an enormous pile of Vanbrugh Baroque set on 2,000 acres, which had been falling apart quietly since the death of the 7th Duke. The 9th Duke needed money. He needed roof repairs. He needed tapestries rewoven, gardens replanted, and the vast West Wing rewired for electricity. He needed, in blunt terms, $2 million American dollars in cash and a trust fund of $2.5 million more in railroad stock. Alva Vanderbilt had exactly such a trust fund in mind, and she had a daughter attached to it. The negotiations had been conducted in London that summer of 1895, partly through the socialite Lady Paget, partly through Alva's own relentless personal pressure. By September, the terms were fixed. Consuelo would bring into the marriage an annuity of $100,000 for the Duke personally, secured by 2,500 shares of Beech Creek Railway stock, with the principal to pass to any children. The dowry was to be paid by William Kissam Vanderbilt. But William Kissam, by the autumn of 1895, had other problems, because his wife, almost simultaneously with the brokering of her daughter's sale, had sued him for divorce. The year 1895 was the year Alva Vanderbilt detonated her own marriage and her daughter's in the same season. The grounds of the divorce were adultery. William's, not hers. He had been conducting a long and poorly concealed affair with a woman named Nellie Neustretter in Paris. Alva had tolerated this for years. In 1895, she decided not to tolerate it. She hired the most expensive divorce lawyer in New York. She filed. She won. The settlement, finalized in March of 1895, gave her $10 million in capital, an income for life, and the custody of all 3 children. It was the largest divorce settlement in American history to that date. The women of New York closed ranks against her. Divorce was not a thing ladies did. $10 million was not a thing ladies did. Alva, now a divorced woman with the social standing of a ghost, needed her daughter's marriage to a duke more than ever, because the Duchess's mother was a woman even the 400 would have to admit to the door. Consuelo did not want to marry the duke. She told her mother so, repeatedly, through the summer of 1895. She was in love with Winthrop Rutherford. She wanted to marry him. Alva told her no. When letters from Rutherford began to arrive, Alva burned them. When Rutherford sent messengers, Alva turned them away at the door. When Consuelo, at Newport that August, went for a bicycle ride along Bellevue Avenue and encountered Rutherford, who had come up from New York expressly to propose, Alva had her followed by a footman and brought home. Later that night, Consuelo tried to refuse the marriage. Alva locked her in her bedroom. The room was upstairs at Marble House, the 70-room white marble palace Alva had commissioned from Richard Morris Hunt at a cost of $11 million, $7 million of it in white Italian and African marble alone. The 17-year-old Consuelo sat in it for 3 days. Her mother came up at intervals to argue. The arguments escalated. Finally, Alva said that she would shoot Winthrop Rutherford herself if her daughter did not yield. Then, when that failed, she announced that the distress had caused her a heart attack, that she was dying, that she would be dead by morning unless Consuelo agreed to marry Marlborough. Consuelo agreed. On the 6th of November, 1895, at St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue, Consuelo Vanderbilt was married to the 9th Duke of Marlborough. She cried, behind her veil from the moment the carriage door closed until the moment the organ began. The church was filled to its 2,000 seats. 50,000 people lined Fifth Avenue to see the Dollar Princess go by. A reporter for the New York Herald wrote that the bride's face was bone white beneath the veil, and that she did not look once at her groom during the ceremony. Alva sat in the front pew in ermine. She was radiant. She had won. The marriage was a disaster. The Duke took his 17-year-old Duchess to Blenheim, showed her her rooms, and informed her that he had a mistress named Gladys Deacon, whom he intended to continue seeing. They had 2 sons who secured the succession, and then they stopped sharing a bed. The Duke spent his wife's dowry repairing his palace. The Duchess lived in 300 rooms she had not chosen, in a country she did not love, married to a man who did not pretend to love her for the next 11 years. In 1906, with Alva's unexpected support, she left him. They were divorced after various annulment maneuvers in 1921. In 1926, as part of a Vatican annulment process, Alva was required to give sworn testimony about her role in her daughter's marriage. The testimony was taken in a church proceeding in New York. Alva was by then 73 years old, a widow for the second time, a famous suffragette, and a woman who did not fear honesty anymore. She said, under oath, that she had had absolute power over her daughter. She said she had forced her daughter to marry the Duke. She said she had done it because she knew better than the girl what would make her happy. It was, by any measure, the single most honest sentence a Gilded Age mother ever spoke in public. It was also, in its own way, a confession that she had committed a kind of murder. By 1926, Alva Belmont had been at war with everything that confession implied for almost 20 years. And her third husband, in dying, had put a weapon in her hand that the Gilded Age mother of 1895 could not have imagined. Chapter 6. The Widow Who Burned the Rule Book. When Oliver Belmont died of a ruptured appendix in 1908, his widow did not retreat into crape. She armed herself. Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont had been, in the best sense, the great surprise of Alva's life. He was the younger son of the banker August Belmont, the Rothschilds' man in New York, and he lived on inherited money in a style Alva recognized and understood. In the years following her divorce from William Kissam Vanderbilt, she had found in Oliver something she had not previously been offered by any man she had met, which was a friend. He encouraged her opinions. He took her politics seriously. He did not particularly mind that the 400 had closed against her. They married in January of 1896, 10 months after her divorce, in the teeth of a scandalized New York press. The marriage lasted 12 years. It was, by all internal accounts, happy. Oliver died on the 10th of June, 1908, of acute peritonitis following a burst appendix. Alva was 55 years old. She inherited his Long Island estate, his New York townhouses, his share of his brother's racing operation, and a personal fortune in the neighborhood of $10 million, to add to the $10 million she had retained from the Vanderbilt settlement. She did not wear black. She wore white and went to London. In London in the years before 1912, she met the most militant wing of the British suffrage movement. She attended a speech by Emmeline Pankhurst in an East End meeting hall. Pankhurst was 49, gaunt, fierce, and recently released from Holloway Prison, where she had been force-fed with rubber tubes during a hunger strike. She spoke for an hour about the nature of citizenship, about the uselessness of petitioning a parliament that refused to acknowledge the petitioners as persons, and about the specific moral legitimacy of property damage in political protest. Alva, sitting in the fourth row in her widow's weeds, had what a colleague later called a conversion. She went back to New York with a new plan. The plan unfolded over 12 years in the following stages. First, she turned Marble House into a lecture hall. She opened the palace that had once been the scene of her greatest social triumph to public meetings for the cause of women's suffrage. She charged $5 admission, which was pocketed by the movement. She handed the Chinese tea house in the garden over to a working women's committee. She stood at the gates herself in white and greeted the visitors and did not care that the old 400 were, for the second time in her life, refusing to speak to her. Second, she paid for things. She underwrote the Political Equality Association. She rented headquarters. She printed pamphlets by the 100,000. She paid organizers' salaries. When Alice Paul, a young Quaker with a doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania, split from the larger National American Woman Suffrage Association in 1914 to form a more militant wing, Alva backed Alice Paul. When Alice Paul founded the National Woman's Party in 1916, Alva backed Alice Paul. When Alice Paul needed a headquarters in Washington across from the White House, Alva bought the house and gave her the keys. Third, she organized. In December of 1909, she staged a rally at the New York Hippodrome in support of the 18,000 garment workers on strike at the shirtwaist factories of Lower Manhattan. The event filled the 8,000-seat theater. Anne Morgan, daughter of J.P. Morgan, shared the platform with a 23-year-old immigrant striker named Clara Lemlich. The Hippodrome rally raised the equivalent of more than 100,000 modern dollars in an evening and was, in the eyes of the New York press, the first public alliance between Gilded Age heiresses and their workers. Alva had not invented the alliance, but she had paid for the hall. Fourth, she stood in the line. In January of 1917, the silent sentinels of the National Woman's Party began to picket the gates of the White House. They held purple and gold banners. They said nothing. They were arrested on charges of obstructing the sidewalk. In the Occoquan workhouse in Virginia, they were beaten. They were chained. They were force-fed. Alice Paul was held in solitary confinement in a psychiatric ward. Alva, 64 years old, did not picket herself because her lieutenants did not allow it, but she paid the bail, she paid the lawyers, she paid the press agents, she paid for the telegrams that carried the news of Occoquan out to American newspapers and to the White House, which was, eventually, how the pickets won. The 19th Amendment passed the House in May of 1919, the Senate in June, and was ratified on the 18th of August, 1920, when the Tennessee General Assembly's Harry Byrne, a 24-year-old from Neota, changed his vote after a letter from his mother. In 1921, Alva was elected president of the National Woman's Party. She was 68 years old. She used the position and the remainder of the Belmont fortune to fund the next phase of the movement, which was the Equal Rights Amendment drafted by Alice Paul in 1923 and introduced into every Congress thereafter for the rest of Alva's life. She did not live to see it pass, because it did not pass. She died in Paris in January of 1933, 80 years old, defiant to the last. Her funeral at St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue was conducted entirely by women. The pallbearers were suffragettes. The officiant was a woman priest. The organist was a woman. The 6 honorary pallbearers carried a purple and gold banner that read, "Failure is impossible." It was the last sentence Susan B. Anthony had spoken in public. Alva had broken every contract the Gilded Age had ever written for her. She had divorced a Vanderbilt. She had remarried a Belmont. She had sold one daughter and then, decades later, liberated her. She had weaponized her money against the men who had once owned its architects. She had, in the end, changed a constitution. But across the Atlantic, in a pink marble palace on the Avenue Foch, another American heiress was being taught the same lesson Alva had learned, only slower and in French. And she would pay for her education in a currency that Alva had never had to spend. Chapter 7. The Dowry That Built a Pink Marble Lie. $15 million in trust. $500,000 a year in income, and still her French husband complained that he was hard up. Her name was Anna Gould. She was the youngest daughter of Jay Gould, the Wall Street wolf who had cornered gold in 1869, looted the Erie Railroad, and died in 1892 at the age of 56, leaving $72 million and 6 surviving children. Anna had been 17 when her father died. She was not beautiful. The society papers that chronicled her through the 1890s noted this with the casual cruelty of the period. She was short, dark, heavy-set, with what one paper called masculine features and what another paper, less kindly, called a Mediterranean complexion. She was also, by every account, intelligent, blunt, and entirely without illusion about the reasons men would court her. She knew she was a fortune wearing a dress. In 1894, at 20 years old, she sailed for Paris to assemble a trousseau for a planned marriage to an American suitor named Oliver Peck. The trousseau was her older sister's idea. The voyage was chaperoned, the itinerary was fixed, and then, at a reception at the American embassy, she was introduced to a Frenchman. The Frenchman was Count Boniface de Castellane. He was tall, slender, blonde, elegantly dressed, and professionally charming. He was 27. He had an ancient Provençal title, a mother from the Talleyrand-Périgord family, 6 generations of published aristocratic ancestors, and a personal income that his creditors rated at approximately 0. He owed his tailor. He owed his jeweler. He owed his stable master. He was in Paris specifically to meet American heiresses, because an American dowry was the standard 19th century solution to a 17th century debt. He was, in other words, a professional. He proposed to Anna within the month. They were married on the 4th of March, 1895, at a small ceremony in New York. Anna's dowry, set up as a trust by the Gould estate trustees, was $15 million in capital, with an income to Anna of $500,000 a year, the equivalent today of about $15 million a year. The marriage contract specified that the capital could not be alienated. Boney could not touch it. He could, however, spend freely out of the annual income, and this he began to do at a pace that would have alarmed anyone who had ever kept a ledger. Anna had never kept a ledger. She moved to Paris. She discovered, in slow sequence, the rules of her new life. The first rule was that her husband had not stopped his earlier life. He kept his apartments. He kept his bachelor club. He kept his mistresses, rotating them at a pace his valet kept track of in a pocketbook. The second rule was that her husband's extended family, the Castellanes and the Talleyrand-Périgords, and their various dowager cousins, regarded her as a useful object rather than a relative. They expected entertainment. They expected a box at the opera. They expected dinners. The third rule was that Paris society at large, the Faubourg Saint-Germain and the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, watched her from behind fans and laughed. One American observer, the writer Natalie Barney, cruelly said of her that she was unwashed. Boney spent. He bought her houses. He bought her furniture. He bought her yachts. Most famously, in 1896, he commissioned from the architect Paul Ernest Sanson a private palace on the Avenue du Bois de Boulogne, which would shortly be renamed the Avenue Foch. The building, which Boney titled Le Palais Rose, was a 3/4 scale imitation of the Grand Trianon at Versailles, executed in pale pink marble from quarries at Bouzigues in the Languedoc. The facade ran 150 feet along the avenue. The interiors were paneled in reclaimed Louis XV woodwork, with gilt mirrors salvaged from bankrupt provincial chateaux and tapestries purchased at a discount from the dispersal of the Demidov collection. The total construction bill came in at just over $3 million, roughly $100 million in modern currency. It was, at its opening in 1902, the most expensive private house built in Paris in the Belle Époque. Anna paid for it out of her annual income. She paid also for the housewarming. The housewarming was a fête for 3,000 guests. It featured fireworks over the Bois de Boulogne, a troupe of the Garde Républicaine on horseback, a performance by the Opera Ballet in the courtyard, a buffet laid for 1,200 in the garden, and 2 orchestras in rotating galleries. Anna wore a dress embroidered with seed pearls. She stood beside her husband at the head of the grand staircase and received the Faubourg. Later in the evening, a cousin of Bonny's, the Marquise de Jaucourt, was overheard in the conservatory referring to the hostess as La Petite Américaine. It was not affectionate. Anna pretended not to hear. Bonny's own birthday parties, of which there were several, cost $150,000 apiece. He rented the Bois de Boulogne, flooded sections of it for gondolas, and imported a Russian choir. He complained to his friends that his American wife did not understand Parisian entertaining. He kept up a steady, hushed stream of observations about her appearance, which reached her ear by every servant in the house. He once remarked, within the hearing of a footman, that her legs in her nightdress reminded him of piano legs. The footman told the butler told the housekeeper told Anna's lady's maid told Anna. By 1906, Anna Gould had been married 11 years, had borne 4 children, had spent through her income at the rate of roughly $500,000 a year, and had come to the conclusion that her husband's cost to her exceeded even the fortune of her father Jay Gould. She began, quietly, to keep a ledger of her own. And one morning in the spring of 1906, with her husband away on business in Auvergne, she opened it. Chapter 8. The morning she cut him out like surgery. While Boney was away on business, Anna emptied the palace of her possessions, cut every account, and disconnected the telephone. The operation took 36 hours. She had been planning it for months. She had consulted American lawyers in Paris and French lawyers in New York. She had quietly transferred her portable wealth, the jewelry and the bonds and the American securities, out of joint accounts and into vehicles in her own name. She had, with the cold precision her father Jay Gould had once used to corner the gold market, reduced the entire machinery of her marriage to a set of movable parts, and then she had moved them. On a Tuesday in April 1906, while Boney de Castellane was staying at the estate of his maternal uncle, Anna ordered the packing. She kept her instructions verbal because she did not trust the servants with written notes. 2 of the maids, the cook, and the butler were in her pay. They carried down to the carriage lanes the trunks that contained her wardrobe, her children's wardrobes, her own linens, and the 2 small Pissarros she had personally bought for her sitting room. The remainder of the art, the bulk of which Boney had commissioned and considered his, she left in place. The point was surgical. She was removing herself. She was not stealing. She closed her bank accounts. She countermanded her standing orders with the tradesmen. She wrote personally to the director of the Credit Lyonnais branch on the Boulevard des Italiens and revoked her husband's authority over her deposit. She locked the private office in which her household books were kept. She instructed her lawyer to file, at 8 o'clock the following morning, a petition for judicial separation on grounds of adultery, with particulars. Then she ordered the switchboard in the basement of the Palais Rose disconnected, so that when Boney returned to the house, he could not telephone for a banker. Boney returned that Thursday. He walked into a cold house. The divorce proceedings, which dragged on for 2 years, were a sustained public humiliation of a kind Parisian high society had not witnessed since the fall of the Second Empire. The evidence was detailed. Boney's mistresses were named in court. The names included at least 2 married women of the Faubourg, 1 stage actress at the Comédie Française, and a dancer at the opera. The financial accounting was worse. The court heard that Bonny de Castellane had spent, across 11 years of marriage, approximately $10 million of his wife's money on houses, on horses, on parties, on jewelry for other women, and on the Palais Rose itself. He had acquired no assets of his own. He had, in the language of the court, dissipated the fortune he had married without producing any corresponding estate. The decree was granted in 1906. Boney was ordered to pay Anna what he did not have, which was a settlement on the children. Anna, for her part, was granted custody of the 4 boys, the house, its contents, and the right to resume the use of her maiden name. She did not resume it. She had other plans. On the 7th of July, 1908, in a civil ceremony in the town hall of the 16th arrondissement, Anna Gould became the Duchesse de Talleyrand. Her new husband was Prince Hélie de Talleyrand Périgord, Duc de Sagan. He was also, as every Parisian paper immediately and gleefully pointed out, her former husband's first cousin. He was 49. He was tall, reserved, humorous, well-read, and crucially, the possessor of an actual private fortune in his own right. He did not need her money. He had, additionally, a title that outranked Boney's by a step of precedence. Bonny de Castellane had been a count. Hélie was a duke and a prince. Anna Gould was now a duchess. Her former husband was now the cousin of her new husband, which meant that every family gathering for the rest of his life would require him to sit below the salt from a woman he had once mocked for her legs. It was, in the cold calculations of the Goulds, an elegant revenge. Anna set about reinventing the Palais Rose. She hired workmen to chisel Boney's entwined initials out of the marble above the bedroom doors. She commissioned new Louis XV boiseries to replace the panels he had personally chosen. She reorganized the entrance hall, removed his portrait from the staircase, and replaced it with a portrait of her father, Jay Gould, the pirate of the Erie Railroad, who now looked down upon his daughter's guests from the place of honor in a palace 3,000 miles from his grave. She threw parties. She became, slowly, one of the serious hostesses of pre-war Paris. Ambassadors attended her dinners. Marcel Proust, who had caricatured Boney in his novels, praised Anna's taste in music. The Faubourg, which had once laughed at her, ate her food. Boney, meanwhile, lived on a small allowance from his own family in a small apartment in reduced circumstances. He wrote a memoir titled How I Discovered America, which was published in French in 1924. The book was a long, theatrical lament for his lost fortune, which he blamed on the tastelessness of his wife. It sold respectably in France and poorly elsewhere. He died in 1932, in debt, at the age of 65. Anna did not attend the funeral. She had, by any external measure, won. But fortune, like memory, keeps double-entry books. And in the years after 1920, the Gould ledger was quietly entering a series of losses on the personal side, losses that no legal victory could offset. 3 of her 4 sons by Boney died before she did. Her health, never robust, began to deteriorate in the 20s. And in the spring of 1929, in her bedroom in the Palais Rose, a telegram arrived from the police of the 6th arrondissement that would carry her the final, unwelcome proof that her defiance had not been free. Chapter 9. The Son Who Took His Life at 19. Anna Gould had defeated Boney, rebuilt the Palais Rose, and married the better Talleyrand, but fate had not yet finished collecting. The first installment of the invoice came early. Of the 4 sons Anna had borne to Boney de Castellan, one, a boy named Jason, had died in infancy in 1896. A second, the eldest surviving son, Boniface Jr., would die of an illness in 1946 in his early 40s. A third, Georges, would die in 1949. Only the 4th, Jean, would outlive his mother. The Castellan sons were handsome, clever, difficult, and restless, and none of them turned out to be men of affairs. The family fortune, as a practical matter, had been grafted not onto them, but onto their cousins in the Talleyrand line, who had their own heirs and their own claims. Anna's marriage to Haley, by contrast, had produced one surviving child, a son named Howard, born on the 19th of August, 1909, in Paris. He was christened Howard Marcel Bosson Charles Maurice, and he would be known, once he came of age, as the Duc de Sagan. She loved him with the focused, defensive love of a woman who had lost a previous child and who understood the rules of inheritance. He grew into a tall, fair, thoughtful boy. He was intelligent. He wrote poetry. He was sent to the best schools in Switzerland and in France. He was prepared, in the manner of his class, to assume a title and a seat at the Jockey Club and a box at the opera, and eventually a wife chosen with care. He did not cooperate. In the spring of 1929, when he was 19 years old, Howard informed his parents that he wished to marry. The woman he wished to marry was in her early 30s. She was married, though separated from her husband. She was not wealthy. The combination was intolerable to his father, Haley, a man of the old aristocracy who understood titles as a property to be husbanded across generations. Haley refused his consent. Anna, who might in another life have defended her son, did not defend him. She sided with Haley. The family closed ranks. On the 8th of July, 1929, Howard returned to his small apartment on the left bank of the Seine. He wrote a short note. He placed a revolver against his temple. He pulled the trigger. He was 19 years and 9 months old. The building concierge found him the following morning. The police of the 6th arrondissement were called. A telegram was sent to the Palais Rose. The Parisian papers, which had once crowed over Anna's marriage, her divorce, her second marriage, her parties, and her pink marble, did not now crow. They reported the death in small columns on inside pages. The family gave no interviews. The funeral was held at the church of Saint-Pierre de Chaillot, 3 blocks from the Palais Rose. Anna wore black. Haley stood beside her. She did not cry in public. She did not, according to those who knew her best in the following decade, cry very much in private either. She had been raised by Jay Gould. She had learned as a child that a Gould did not weep in front of creditors. She did not weep now in front of the ghost of her son. Haley died in 1937 of natural causes. He was 78. Anna was 62. The Palais Rose, which had been the stage set of her triumph, became, in the space of 8 years, a mausoleum with a woman living inside it. the Second World War emptied it further. In June of 1940, as the German armies closed on Paris, Anna shuttered the Palais Rose. She packed the Pissarros. She wrapped the Louis XV chairs in canvas. She loaded the contents of her safe into a locked trunk. She left France by train to Portugal, and from Lisbon she sailed home to the United States. She was 65 years old. She had not lived in America for 45 years. She was arriving, in effect, as a foreign widow with an accent. She went to Lyndhurst. Lyndhurst was the Gothic revival estate her father J. Gould had purchased in 1880 on the Hudson River at Tarrytown, New York. It had originally been designed by Alexander Jackson Davis for a former mayor of New York in 1838. J. Gould had bought it for Anna's mother, Helen Day Gould, as a summer house, and after Helen's death in 1889, it had become, for the Gould children, a permanent object of family piety. Anna's older sister, Helen Miller Gould Shepherd, had lived there until her death in 1938. When Anna came home in 1940, she went to Lyndhurst and she stayed. She lived there, mostly alone except for a staff of 8, for the next 21 years. She read. She walked on the porch above the river. She received a few visitors. She made careful arrangements for the preservation of the estate. She established that on her death, Lyndhurst would be given to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, to be run as a public museum in memory of her family. It would be open to the public in 1965, 3 years before her death. She returned to Paris after the war only briefly to supervise the reopening of the Palais Rose. She found the house intact. The German occupation authorities had used the building as an official residence, but they had not stripped its contents. She reopened the rooms. She received a few friends. She closed the house again. She returned to Lyndhurst. She died at Lyndhurst on the 30th of November, 1961. She was 86. The Palais Rose, standing empty on the Avenue Foch, passed to a cousin who could not afford its upkeep and who sold it in 1969 to a property developer. The Pink Marble Palace was demolished in the same year. A concrete apartment building now stands on the site. And by the time the Palais Rose came down, the most famous heiress of the 20th century was already 18 years into the long, slow architecture of her own wreckage, half a world away in California. Chapter 10. The 4-year-old who found her mother dead. In a suite at the Plaza Hotel in 1917, a 4-year-old girl walked in on the body of the woman who was supposed to raise her. The girl's name was Barbara Hutton. She had been born on the 14th of November, 1912, in Manhattan. Her father was Franklin Laws Hutton, a vice president of the E.F. Hutton brokerage house. Her mother was Edna Woolworth Hutton, the youngest daughter of Frank Winfield Woolworth, who had built a retail empire of 5 and 10-cent stores with more than 1,000 locations across the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Edna was 27. She was beautiful. She was unhappy. The Huttons kept a suite at the Plaza. In May of 1917, Edna was found dead in a bedroom of that suite. The official cause was given, variously, as heart failure and as mastoiditis. The coroner's report was never made public in full. The maid who discovered Edna alerted Frank Woolworth, Edna's father, who came immediately and who, with the assistance of the hotel management, controlled what the press was permitted to know. A photograph of a medicine bottle was reportedly removed from the bedside table before the reporters arrived. Whether Edna's death was accidental, illness-related, or self-inflicted has never been conclusively established. What is established is that Barbara, 4 years old, was in the suite at the time. A nanny was with her. The nanny went into the bedroom. Barbara, not yet restrained, followed. She saw what was on the bed. She spoke about it exactly once in her life, in a letter she wrote in the 1960s. She wrote that she remembered her mother's hair and her mother's stillness and the color of the curtains. After Edna's death, Barbara was raised largely by her grandfather. Frank Winfield Woolworth lived in a 60-room Italian Renaissance mansion called Winfield Hall, which he had built in Glen Cove on Long Island for the equivalent of 40 million modern dollars. The house had a pipe organ, a swimming pool lined with Italian marble, a 2-story formal garden, and a library with leather-bound books arranged by color rather than content. Frank's wife, Jenny, Barbara's grandmother, was in the early stages of the dementia that would eventually kill her. Frank himself was a man of immense energy and growing paranoia. He slept with a pistol under his pillow. He inspected his own stores unannounced at midnight. He believed, with some justification, that various former business associates wished him dead. Barbara grew up in this house. She was a quiet, dark-haired little girl who read too much and spoke too little. She had tutors. She had a French governess. She had a butler named Cuthbert. Cuthbert, according to one biographer, pulled her aside on the day of her 10th birthday and warned her, in the soft London accent she remembered all her life, that she would someday be the richest girl in the world, and that this meant only one thing, which was that every man who came near her would want to marry her for it, and that she must be very careful and trust nobody. He then gave her a small bouquet of violets and withdrew. Frank Woolworth died in 1919. His will divided the fortune among his daughters and grandchildren. Barbara's share, because her mother had predeceased him, was placed in trust until Barbara's 21st birthday. The trust was administered by her father, Franklin Hutton, and by the Woolworth trustees. Its initial value was $28 million. Compounded through the roaring 20s, by the time Barbara came of age in the autumn of 1933, it had grown to approximately $42 million, making her, as Cuthbert had predicted, at 21, possibly the richest young woman in the world. The 21st birthday arrived on the 14th of November, 1933. The United States was in the 4th year of the Great Depression. 1 in 4 American workers was unemployed. Bread lines ran down 34th Street, 4 blocks from the Ritz. Her father and her aunts threw her a debutante ball at the Ritz-Carlton. The bill, inflated by the gardenia blankets imported from Belgium, the 3 orchestras, and the 200-pound birthday cake, came to approximately $60,000. The New York newspapers ran photographs. Editorial pages in Chicago and Detroit ran denunciations. A widely reproduced cartoon showed Barbara in a tiara stepping across the bodies of hungry children to reach a champagne fountain. The caption read, "Poor little rich girl." The name stuck to her for the rest of her life. She had already met, at a party in Venice that summer, a man named Alexis Mdivani, the son of a Georgian émigré who claimed a Russian princely title that scholars had been unable to verify. He was handsome. He was bankrupt. He was 28. In the weeks following her birthday, he proposed. Her father disliked him. Her aunts disliked him. Her lawyers disliked him. In June of 1933, she had already signed the contracts. They married on the 20th of June at Paris. The newspapers called it a fairy tale. On their wedding night, the fairy tale began to deliver its first invoice. Chapter 11. 7 Husbands and a Gold Rolls Royce. On her wedding night, her first husband told her she was too fat, and she never ate a full meal again. Alexis Mdivani was not a prince. He was the son of a Georgian cavalry officer who had fled the Russian Revolution with his 3 sons and 1 daughter, and a fraudulent patent of nobility. He married Barbara for her money. The marriage contract released to him a lump sum of $1 million at the ceremony. On the yacht that was their honeymoon, in the Mediterranean, he looked at her across the dinner table and informed her that she was too fat to be a princess and that she would have to do something about it. She was 21 years old and weighed about 125 pounds. Within a month, she was down to 98. Within a year, she had developed the disordered relationship with food that she would carry to her grave. The Mdivani marriage was annulled in 1935. She paid him $2 million in cash to leave. He took the money and bought Spanish polo ponies. He died in 1935, crashing his Rolls-Royce on a road between Perpignan and Palamos at 30. She was already engaged to her second husband before the first was buried. His name was Kurt Heinrich Eberhard Erdmann, Georg von Haugwitz Reventlow, a Danish count of genuine but minor pedigree. He was also, though she did not fully understand this for some time, a man of considerable physical cruelty. He beat her. He humiliated her in front of servants. He spent her money. He converted her, for reasons related to European tax law, away from her American citizenship. She renounced her American passport in 1937 and was thereafter, for the duration of the marriage, a Danish subject. She bore him a son, Lance Reventlow, in 1936. The marriage ended in 1941. The settlement cost her $1.5 million in cash plus properties. She regained American citizenship only after years of litigation in 1941. In July of 1942, in Lake Arrowhead, California, Barbara Hutton married the only man she ever loved, the British actor Cary Grant. He was 38. She was 29. The American press, because Cary Grant had no money from Barbara, coined a new nickname for the marriage. They called it Cash and Carry. The name embarrassed him. He offered, from the start, to take nothing from her. He kept the offer. The 3 years of the marriage were, by every account of those who knew them, the closest Barbara ever came to ordinary happiness. They separated in 1945. The divorce, finalized in 1945, paid Cary Grant nothing. He remained, for the rest of her life, one of the few people she could telephone at 4 in the morning and be certain he would answer. After Cary Grant, the marriages accelerated in quality downward. In 1947, she married Prince Igor Trubetskoy, a Lithuanian bicycle racer with a genuine but impoverished Russian title. The marriage lasted 4 years. The settlement cost her $1 million. In 1953, she married Porfirio Rubirosa, a Dominican diplomat, polo player, and professional seducer, whose previous wife had been Doris Duke, the other richest girl in the world. The marriage lasted 73 days. The settlement, negotiated by his lawyers with the thoroughness of a bill of lading, included $3.5 million in cash, a converted B-25 bomber with his initials on the fuselage, a string of polo ponies, a 17th century Paris townhouse, and a Dominican coffee plantation. He went on afterward to marry a French actress and to die crashing his Ferrari into a chestnut tree in the Bois de Metides, Boulogne, in 1965. In 1955, she married Baron Gottfried von Kram, a German tennis champion who had once been one of the finest players in the world. The marriage was white. Von Cram was gay. She had known this. She had married him because she wanted company. It lasted 4 years, and the settlement cost her $600,000. In 1964, she married a man named Raymond Doan, a Laotian painter, who, on her lawyer's instructions, was elevated to a manufactured Vietnamese princely title so that she could be titled in turn. This marriage, her 7th, lasted until 1966. The settlement was relatively small because by then there was less money to settle. Between husbands, she lived in hotels. She bought Winfield House in London in 1946 for the equivalent of $4 million modern dollars, and, when she found she no longer wished to live in it, gave it to the United States government in 1955 for $1. It became the official residence of the American ambassador to the Court of St. James, and remains so. She bought houses in Tangier, in Cuernavaca, in Beverly Hills. She bought a palace in Tangier. She gave enormous parties. She had, at one point, a gold-plated Rolls-Royce. The $42 million dwindled. Lance Reventlow, her only child, died in a light plane crash in Colorado in 1972, at the age of 36. He had been, by her own admission, the only person whose survival she cared about. After his death, she stopped trying to manage what remained of her fortune. She dismissed advisors. She signed checks she could not afford. She paid the salaries of servants she no longer saw. She took to her bed in a suite at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. She weighed at the end approximately 80 pounds. She kept her jewels in a cookie tin in the closet. She drank. She died in the Beverly Wilshire on the 11th of May, 1979, of a heart attack, aged 66. The accounting of her estate, published in newspapers within the week, reported that at the time of her death, her bank balance was approximately $3,500. She had, according to those who had worked for her at the end, nothing of significance left except the residue of 4 passports, 7 husbands, and a single sentence that Cuthbert the butler had spoken in a garden on Long Island in 1922. Chapter 12. What the Black Veil was hiding all along. 4 women, 4 fortunes, 4 different kinds of defiance, and a single question the Gilded Age never wanted answered. The question was this: if a woman's husband could, from the grave, dictate the color of her dress and the occupant of her bed by attaching conditions to the money she had helped him accumulate, what was it exactly that she had been legally permitted to own during his life? The answer, examined closely, was almost nothing. The Married Women's Property Acts, first passed by New York in 1848 and extended by most American states in the decades that followed, had granted married women the right to own property in their own names. But the right was hollow in practice for the wives of the great fortunes, because the fortunes were structured in trust instruments written by their husbands and administered by their husbands' lawyers, and no statute could retroactively rewrite a trust deed. The mourning apparatus was the visible face of this invisible machinery. Godey's Lady's Book, which published the standards, admitted in its own pages that the 6-foot crape veil recommended for a widow in her first year was blinding. Crape was made of silk treated with gum to make it stiff and matte. Worn over the face in New York summers, it ran black dye into a woman's skin and hair, and in cases of long exposure, into the corneas of her eyes. The recommended period of first mourning was 1 year. The recommended period of second mourning was 6 months. Third mourning, of purple and gray, ran another 6 months. A widow who took a second husband within 3 years of her first husband's death was considered, in polite society, to be announcing publicly that her first marriage had been a commercial transaction. A widow who remarried after 3 years was considered to be announcing it privately. The mourning apparatus, in other words, was not a costume of grief. It was an accounting instrument. Madeline Astor, 19 years old and pregnant in the Atlantic in 1912, was the first of our 4 to break it, and she broke it publicly and at a cost of roughly 200 million modern dollars. She lived another 3 decades. She would marry one more time after William Dick in 1933 to an Italian prizefighter turned actor named Enzo Fiermonte. That marriage ended in 1938. She died in Palm Beach in 1940 of heart disease at the age of 47. Her son Jakey, the Titanic baby, lived to see his 80th birthday and died in 1992. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, who had married money and then married love and then married the vote, died in Paris in January of 1933. Marble House in Newport became, in 1963, a property of the Preservation Society of Newport County, open to the public as a museum, where the visitor today can stand in the upstairs bedroom in which Alva locked Consuelo for 3 days and can read, on an informational plaque, the sentence Alva swore in 1926. The Belmont House on Capitol Hill, which she had bought for Alice Paul as the National Woman's Party headquarters, is today the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument, administered by the National Park Service. Anna Gould, Castellane Talleyrand, died at Lyndhurst in 1961. Lyndhurst today is a property of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, open to the public as a house museum, surrounded by 67 acres of Hudson River parkland. The Palais Rose on the Avenue Foch was demolished in 1969. A single pink marble fragment of the staircase was salvaged and is now in a private collection in Normandy. Barbara Hutton died at the Beverly Wilshire on the 11th of May, 1979. Winfield House in Regent's Park, her gift to her country, is still the official residence of the American ambassador in London, and first ladies and presidents sleep there when they visit. F.W. Woolworth and Company, which had made her fortune, closed its last American store in 1997. The retail model on which 5 generations of the Woolworth family had lived, the 5 and 10 cent store, is today preserved only in a few vintage signs and in the name of the building at 233 Broadway in Manhattan, which is still called the Woolworth Building. 4 fortunes. 4 houses turned into museums, monuments, embassies, or parking lots. 4 women buried, and 4 versions of the same sentence carved in effect onto the same invisible stone. The sentence reads as follows: "The economic apparatus that surrounded the wealthy American woman in the decades between the Civil War and the Second World War was a single instrument, and its purpose was to convert female grief into male capital. The remarriage clause paid her to stay a widow. The dollar princess trade paid her to cross the Atlantic. The dowry trust paid her to stay married to a man who spent her income. The social register paid her to stay respectable. And the black crape draped across the body of every rich woman in the first year of her widowhood paid her to stay quiet. 4 women refused to stay quiet. Madeline walked away from $200 million to marry a banker in Bar Harbor. Alva divorced a Vanderbilt, married a Belmont, buried him, and spent the remainder of his money on a constitutional amendment. Anna emptied the Palais Rose of everything that belonged to her and married her husband's cousin 3 years later. Barbara married 7 men and spent a $40 million trust down to $3,500 in a hotel suite in Beverly Hills because the $40 million, as she finally understood too late, had never been her friend. Each of them paid an invoice. Madeleine paid in foreclosed trust funds and in 4 decades of rebuilding a smaller life. Alva paid in the sound of her daughter weeping behind a wedding veil in a church at Fifth Avenue. Anna paid in the body of a 19-year-old son on the floor of a Left Bank apartment. Barbara paid in 98 pounds of flesh and a cookie tin full of jewels in the closet of a hotel. The uncomfortable truth, the one the Gilded Age never printed in Godey's Ladies book, is that the theater has not closed. Every celebrity prenuptial that trends on a phone screen, every divorce settlement leaked to a gossip column, every billionaire widow photographed in a veil at a funeral, every dollar princess in reverse who marries into a dynasty and finds herself inside a contract she did not read carefully enough, is a direct descendant of the instruments these 4 women broke their hands trying to snap in half. We still watch. We still tally. We still assign verdicts in comment threads and morning shows to women whose marriages have become, because of the money, a matter of public interest. What the 4 of them paid for in cash and in flesh, we are still cheaply consuming. And somewhere in the archives of American surrogates' courts, tens of thousands of old wills still sit in tied folders, waiting to be reread by somebody who understands that the black veil was never about grief. It was about collateral. And the collateral, across 6 decades and 4 remarkable women, was always, always the same thing.